Welcome everyone to another edition of ALN Thursday at 3. And today we're continuing the UN series with the asset management team leaders. Unfortunately, Daniel is ill and he has agreed to come back next week and give the presentation that he had planned on giving now. Linda Newton is available and she'll be joining us, and I'm excited to share what she has to offer. But before we do that, we want to thank our ALN Platinum member, Onuma Inc., and our ALN patron members, Definitive Logic, ABS Quality Evaluations, CGI, and Jacobs. And want to thank all of our organizational members, including a new association connection we have with PMAC, the Canadian Asset Management Group. We're starting to bring them into the Value and Benefits from Asset Management series that we're doing with the Asset Management Council out of Australia. So there's a lot of excitement happening there. And like I said, all of our organizational members. And next week, we will continue the UN series. And Daniel will be much better and will be happy to be talking with us. So let's bring on Linda Newton. Linda, hi. How are you feeling today?
I'm good. I'm fine. I've already had my second bout of COVID, so.
Yeah, I've had it twice. It's no fun. And one thing that I did not say last week is, where are you?
I am in Ottawa, Canada. So in our nation's capital.
How are things going there today?
Not bad actually. We've had quite the crazy summer when it comes to infrastructure and weather. We've had a series of Thursdays that people started to call Tornado Thursdays. And we don't get the tornadoes, the strength that you get in the US, but we had about 4 Thursdays in a row where if it was Thursday, there must be a thunderstorm and a small tornado that touches down and takes a few roofs off.
Wow.
But never seen a summer like that. So it's been quite interesting. But today it is Thursday and it is lovely and it is sunny and it's about 20 degrees. It's a perfect day.
Good.
No
Glad you don't have
forecast.
No tornadoes today.
No, we're good.
Thank you again for joining us. And just for the record, why don't you reintroduce yourself and your role, and then we'll get on to talking about the handbook and your role in that handbook.
Sure, thanks. So I got involved in the project when we started back in 2017. Daniel reached out to me. My background has been in asset management all my life. It just hasn't always been called that. I started out in the Canadian military as a construction engineer. So so similar to the Army Corps of Engineers. And from there moved into academia, still focusing on construction and maintenance and infrastructure. That's always been my passion. And so when I sort of retired from work life and set up my own consultancy, I got approached by Daniel to help with this particular project. And we started off, well, we'll talk about some of the things we started off with today, but that's how I became involved. So it's so exciting because this has been my passion my entire life. And to be able to take this to a very fundamental level, almost back to where I started 35 years ago, is what's really, I found very exciting about the project and the work we're doing.
Well, that's great. And we found out from Mark Knight, an ALN senior fellow, that you're also a photographer, and that some of your
not intentionally.
And that some of your photography has appeared in this.
Yeah, so most of the pictures are mine, and they're not professional, photography pictures. They're all taken with my cell phone, but I have, unlike other people, when I travel, and I travel quite a bit, I don't tend to take touristy pictures. I take infrastructure pictures, which sort of drove my family nuts for a long time. But having this bevy of them everywhere we've gone has actually been quite useful in my teaching and in writing the infrastructure manual, because I never had to worry about copyright. So wherever I go, I'm taking pictures of exposed pipes or buildings or my kids used to say, "Get over it, Mom. It's just a road." And I'm like, "No, it's not just a road."
Oh, it could be a cover.
Exactly.
And this is a beautiful cover. It grabs my attention every time I see it. Boy, does it
Yeah.
say assets.
Yeah, that's
And
Bogota. That's the funicular in Bogota,
okay.
Colombia of all places. Yeah.
So I don't think we've showed this on ALN Thursday at 3 before, but the actual name of the book is Managing Infrastructure Assets for Sustainable Development, a handbook for local and national governments. And it's sponsored by the UN Department of Economics and Social Affairs and the UN Capital Development Fund. And I've got this up because we love it so much. And the outline touches on so many of the key points that we have been talking about for 10 years. You got to have your foundations, like you said, going back to the basics. But asset management is very dynamic system of systems. And you're talking about it that way. And there needs to be a plan. I mean, that's just part of the foundation of it all. And you've got to assess, you've got to plan for what you need and what your capacity is. And then let's go on to this next one. It's data and information. In the information age, of course, asset management is going to have a huge emphasis on data information and climate resilience. It's not about change. We got hit by tornadoes on Thursdays, 4 weeks in a row. That hasn't happened before. Friends of mine in Florida had to evacuate because of the hurricane there. This was the second time in 3 years. We've got to be resilient to whatever's happening, fires, etc. And emergency preparedness is always such a good motivator for getting people into action for a communal good. And so it's excellent to have that. And then we have a national asset leadership strategy, and you have national enabling environment. I mean, the alignment is so clear. It's really wonderful. But it's not just in all those theories. There is an asset management action plan that people can follow. And there's local government experiences that people can read about and understand what's possible for them. I just love this whole book. And we're not going to talk about all of it, but why don't we stop sharing for a second so you can tell us what we are going to talk about.
So I think what we will talk about, so we don't steal too much from Daniel's presentation next week, is we'll talk a little bit about some of the tools, particularly the diagnostic tool and the action plans. And I like what you said about information, because it, if I can sort of touch on that for a moment, it's very interesting when we go into all of our workshops, and I find the same thing here. When you ask people, what can we do to help you with asset management? They all say, oh, we need an asset management information system. And you go, well, what information do you need? Well, we don't know, but if we have a system, we'll know, and what's been is taking people right back to those fundamentals of even data. Like, if you don't know what information you need, if you don't know what data you need, because the data is what you use to get the information, that's part of that's what we like about the diagnostic tool and the AMATs we're going to talk about, because it really gets them thinking about that. What fundamentally do you need to have? Because the system isn't going to give you that, right? You need to know what information you need, or what data you need, and what you want to do with it. And you can do that on a piece of paper.
Yes. We had our board meeting just Tuesday, and one of our board members recommended a 1-page business plan.
Oh,
and everyone was excited about that. And they're going to have another meeting before our next quarterly meeting so that they can roll up their sleeves and find out what goes on that 1-page business plan. So yes. And it's really about that. It's about the business process model. And talking to people and extracting the information categories is the foundation for so much. Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's amazing how many organizations you'll go into where they'll think that the right IT system will solve all their problems without fundamentally understanding, as I've said, what they need first of all, right? To help get there.
That is so critical. So can I go to the slides?
Yeah, go on, please
Okay.
do.
So here is the slide there. Oh, but because I didn't stop it from being full screen, then when I go to it, I can't advance it. So now I had to make it not be full screen. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
You know what, Mike? I think all of us do that. Every time I do a presentation, I don't know how many presentations we've done during COVID, and we all we all do the same thing. I'll forget what screen I'm on, and then you think I've done this so many times. Why am I forgetting?
I just blame it on Nick not being here. I've got an
No,
easier
there you go.
excuse. My technical director has a life other than what I want him to do.
Yeah.
A figure.
So we've got we've got several toolkits in the handbook, and I'm just going to touch on the first two, but just to quickly talk about all of them. I'll go into the first two in a bit more detail in a moment. The diagnostic tool is what really started the whole project. And that's what I was initially hired to do by the UN, is come up with a very simple means of assessing infrastructure asset management awareness. And I'll talk about what we call that awareness in a moment. And then out of that evolved that, okay, we've done this assessment, we've made these recommendations, what do we do? Well, let's come up with some simple gap analysis tool that they can use to come up with a plan for one asset. And so that's where the AMAP came out. And the name from that came from UNCDF have what they call investment management action plans. And so it was just a change.
UN Capital Development Fund. We
Yes.
got to try not to say initials here.
Yes,
It
UN
means so many
Capital
things.
Development Fund.
Yes.
I'm twice as guilty because of my military background.
Oh, okay. Recover. Yes.
And then, there's a whole chapter on the building data and information system. And so that particular chapter is great because it offers tools of how you structure data and understanding what information you need and what level do you need it at, right? Because we don't need the same level of information for everything, right? Data costs money to collect, whether you collect it in a system or you collect it on paper and you have to update it. And so that is a super chapter that was written by Dr. Ajif Kumar Parlikad. And then, of course, the emergency response, how do we adapt our AMAPs for that? And then the climate vulnerability assessment tool is a great one that can be used by people to assess just where are you with your own infrastructure when you've gone through all of these other aspects. Where do you sit in terms of your vulnerability for climate change? And then, as you mentioned, the enabling environment is like, if we're doing all of this at the local level, what are simple ways that national governments or regional governments can help support all of this? So those tools are all in the handbook, and everybody can have a look at them. And Daniel will touch a little bit more on them next week. But I'm going to talk about the first two. So the diagnostic tool, as I said, this is we started out with this. This is what I was asked to do, and I worked on this with another consultant, Mary-Lee Uter. And we wanted something that was really, really simple. And so we looked at everything that was out there. I mean, we must have scanned about 20 or 30 different types of assessment tools, including the ISO, the IAM tool. We looked at the International Infrastructure Management Manual. And the structure of the tool actually came from the Government of New Zealand's AM maturity assessment. But Mike and I were just talking about this earlier about I wasn't keen on using the word maturity or capacity. Cecilia, I'll answer your question in a moment. Because it was more about creating awareness. To me, the capacity assessment and maturity assessment comes afterwards. Let's try to develop a tool that will just raise awareness, first of all. And I'll answer Cecilia's questions and I'll explain how we did that. So yes, it's been translated into all of the main UN languages, also Swahili, and it is in the midst of being translated into Bangla, and Nepali, I believe, and Chinese. So the reasons that it was written so simply was to make it accessible to everybody, but also to ensure that when it translated, the language could easily be translated. So we were using terminology that almost meant the same, in other languages. So I would spend a bit of time going back and forth with French and Spanish, just looking at what the word meant and was it actually the same meaning? Just to test out some of it when I was writing it. But so yes, translated into at least 7 or 8 languages. So yeah, so the diagnostic tool, the idea was that you could do it different ways, right? We could do a formal assessment. So there's 3 parts to it, which you can't see very well here on the screen, but it just gives you an idea. And the first part was more of an inflection or a reflection that is done for at the local level, and very basic questions, just trying to get a sense of what do they know about themselves as an organization. And then there's a series of 14 questions that ask them about asset management, all the way from levels of service, operational management, financial management, and then enablers, policies and processes and sustainability. And then the final part is they're actually scored. And so the idea was we wanted to structure it that we had these series of questions. We also then said, well, what does that mean? What does a good answer look like? And then with each of these awareness levels, as the score went from 1 to 4, the level of awareness of what that meant increased. So, it wasn't you have to be a 4. It may be that for you, the most optimum place to be is 3 or 2, and that we're at a 1, we'd like to be here, and this is what we want to put our focus in. So the idea was that you could do it formally, as I mentioned here, or they could take it themselves and learn from it as well, which was kind of cool. I actually used it with our House of Commons. I was doing some work with our House of Commons, and I had them do a self-assessment. And it was really neat seeing how their self-assessment compared to my assessment. They were actually harsher on themselves. So it was sort of a proof that it does quite work well when you look at it yourself. You could know nothing about it, you could take it and you could use it. And so that was the tool. And that's what started the whole project. So the whole project rolling.
Well, it's a great start. There are so many good human behavior elements of that. And that's what we've learned. It's not about the tools. It's not about the processes. It's about the culture that leadership uses to help improve human behaviors. So I expect you want the next slide.
Sure. So yeah, go ahead.
All right.
So one of the things, once we'd done this diagnosis, and we were using that to then think about workshops. And we thought, well, if we're going to do this assessment, how do we, at the end of the assessment, there's ask them the questions, get them to think about it, give them a score, identify where they could be with a little bit of work, and then identify actions that will get them from, say, a 1 in asset inventory, right? And understand what you have, where is it, what's it worth, to say a 2 or a 3. So what did they need to do there? And in those recommendations, there'd be quick wins that wouldn't take a lot of exercise or a lot of effort. And then there'd be a little more longer term things that may require money and additional resources. So we thought, well, we've put these recommendations in here. What other tool can we give them to help them implement those? And so this is where the idea of this action plan came about. And so Daniel created these 5 steps and said, here are 5 steps. Can we come up with some tool that we can use to take them through these 5 steps? And so that's the idea of how the action plan came about. And so we wrote the action plan in a writing guide, with lots of examples, again, to walk them through it. So even if you didn't have a workshop, you could still use the writing guide, use the template, as some scripted language in there that you don't need to change, right? And then walk through these various steps. We've got a question here.
Are you done with the slide?
No. Do you want
right.
me to answer the question or carry on with the slide?
Well, I will see if the question relates.
Okay. So the idea was that they'd focus on the priority asset. And those of you that heard me last week, it was interesting when we got them to try and think about priority assets. And we said, you can determine priority assets many ways. You could just look at the basic impact if you lose that asset, or you could go a little bit more complex and add things like the financial value, its condition, the impact if you lose it, to determine what it is. And so that was great because it really helped them then focus in on a particular asset. So they would pick, 2 or 3, and then they go through this assessment in our workshops and come out with that one asset. And then they would start to look at, who are the stakeholders associated with that, try to set performance goals for that asset and performance measures. And that we found, so these first 2 steps probably take up half the workshop, because they really, many of us will struggle with we'll have a goal, but that acronym of SMART, and we think, is it timely? Is it relevant? So we would spend a lot of time going through that to get them to think about what those right measures were. Like, you're going to do this, how are you going to measure it? What does it mean? And then using that, they then go back and start to look at, well, what do we currently do? Their current methods and technologies. And then how can we improve it? And that's where, again, you had to focus on, this is an existing asset. This isn't coming up with a bright, shiny new asset. This is trying to help what you've got and make that better, right? So that you then start to say, oh, okay, if I can improve this asset, then maybe I can use this and show that, this process works. I can then use it for other assets. And so then they come out with this plan. And the idea was to get them thinking about, well, do we have operational plans? Do we have proper maintenance? I mean, do we have the right people actually looking after our assets? A critical one that became really evident during the time of COVID of like, where do I get replacement parts? And so, this was particularly challenging in developing countries, because they would get technology that may have come in, such as solar-powered streetlights. And if those streetlights fail, they couldn't get the parts to fix them. There was nowhere locally that they could get those parts, and they were reliant on that coming in from somewhere else in the world. And we saw that here in North America and in Europe. So it was really trying to get them to focus on these simple plans that they could do with their own resources, and using guidance from the diagnostic tool. Were there actions in that diagnostic assessment that gave them some ideas that they could build on, right? And so that has been the challenge, is getting them to put the 2 together. So each time we have the workshops, we have to say, do you have your assessment? Go back, look at your assessment, don't start all over again. You've got some really good stuff there, use it. And that Daniel will talk about the repository, but we've got something like well over 250 AMAPs from around the world that anybody can go on and look at, and our new partners, as they come on board, can go on and look at them for examples, right? So that's
excellent.
It's been kind of fun going through
So
this.
I can stop sharing the slides?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So you got things really going. We'll get to the chat questions I've got in mind. You don't have to worry about those. I'll facilitate that.
All right, good. I'll close my chat. I won't get distracted by it.
Yeah. I know it's a natural instinct. So it's just wonderful what you have done. And some of the comments have been that, yeah, this is what asset management plan is. This is what asset management strategy is. That's what you said to start with. It's just the fundamentals. And let me just say, they're not only needed by less developed countries. Everything you just outlined, we can use in the US. We would love some of the countries where you've had this happen to teach us how it has helped them, and have it be a reverse than typical in terms of the flow of assistance. And we'll talk about that later. But you started off with the word awareness. So the ALN wrote a asset management leadership paper with the Institute of Asset Management. And we said right up front, leadership is needed at every level. So we're not just talking about the C-suite, although that is our focus. But we are aware that there are leaders throughout an organization. So where are you aiming your awareness at?
At all levels.
Okay.
Because I think it's it's important that it starts at the top, and you have to have that asset management champion, But it's also important it's equally important, perhaps more important at the operational level, where you have those leaders, where where they understand how that information feeds into making assets better at the strategic level, and so you've got to have that up and down dialogue. Like, it's not just coming from here top down. And so you need those leaders at the operational level that get it.
Yes.
And can explain explain why it's so important and what the value of it is. And that was why I was so fortunate early on in my career, is that everybody got that through the whole chain. And you don't always have that now.
Yes. So one of the questions was kind of urgent and relates to our initiative with Cecilia to connect the UN with Colombia. Daniel Ortiz Ruiz is a member of is an ALN senior fellow, and he is a member of the Colombian Engineering Association. What are you interested in, Daniel? You're on mute, Daniel.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I'm part of a Colombian Engineering Association. Maybe from 4 years, we are looking for the planning government to implement asset management in all the enterprises or all the communities, governmental. And I think that your document, I've downloaded recently, and I think this could be a good point to start to work with you or to work with UN in this initiative.
Hola, Daniel. And just
Hola.
for everybody to know, Daniel is also my co-chair on ALN Español, which we have to have a session pretty soon. Pero yes, Daniel, sigue con lo que estaba diciendo en español y vamos a ver si te puedo ayudar.
The inertia, to break the inertia in the government is very hard. It's complicated. And if we had support from UN DESA office, will be better for us.
We will be more than happy to make the information exchanges. And Daniel, please come back and talk again when Daniel Platts is speaking. Linda?
Yeah, well, because Daniel, I do believe, I had a meeting with Daniel earlier on in the week on another matter, and I'm sure he mentioned that something is happening in Colombia this fall.
We're working towards that. Yes.
Yeah. So if you're able to come next week, that would be super, because you could ask him directly.
Yes. And we could also maybe get you, Linda, do you speak Spanish?
Not at all. I can read it a little bit because I speak French. I know a few words enough to get through.
And what about Daniel? Does he speak Spanish?
No. But Luis, there is a new staff member in DESA that speaks Spanish, and we do have a Spanish cohort, like Dr. Michelle Ortiz, I think. And
okay.
Fernando Granados. So we did, because we did deliver the workshops in Spanish in Latin America. Yeah.
I figured as much. So maybe we will talk about doing an ALN Español, as well as our work for Colombia and the Colombian Asset Management Association.
I see all kinds of things coming together. So yes, Daniel is the answer to your question.
Yes, because and last week, Daniel, I was thinking of you as we were talking about the main thing that this work is important for is what you always talk about: risk management, and trying to alleviate and eliminate or minimize risk and optimize opportunity and innovation. So I think it's really an exciting time to look at ways that we can partner with the UN asset management team and help them bring what they have put in a simplified fashion that is completely aligned with the ISO 55000 model. It's just a change in verbiage and so forth, and maybe a simplification that might be more accessible to people who get scared when they hear, oh, it's a standard. But you're taking them through the same process that one must go through when one does the 170 items on the ISO 55000 checklist, just in a different way and maybe at a summary level that they don't realize you're asking the same questions. And Daniel's point, I believe, is that when you have the Engineering Association and others advocating for this opportunity to bring standards and bring best practices and things of that nature, but the government doesn't quite know about it, the UN will be a wonderful partner to give credibility to any government seeking to do this kind of work or to implement statutes that say that you ought to do it, or programs. So I think it's excellent.
Okay, and then Linda Obaid has, in addition to making that comments about what you're talking about is the fundamental, foundational asset management issues. He's asking about the buy-in and feedback at the countries, and how do you handle that for countries that have so many tiers and so, and that was something I was going to ask. So if you could give us an example, one of your favorite examples or two of what you are imparting to national approaches to asset management.
Well, it's very similar to what we experience here, in that you'll go to, some groups get it right away and others don't. And there's no rhyme or reason why maybe a smaller municipality gets it and a larger one doesn't, or vice versa. But I know in Uganda so we've done 3 workshops in Uganda because they were so taken by what it was, and they have now implemented a master's in asset management in conjunction with Makerere University. Now, part of that has been a big UNCDF presence, because the regional office, Capital Development Fund presence, the regional office is in Kampala. But there's been huge uptake in Uganda and Tanzania. And then Kenya's been quite keen. And then other countries we've struggled a little bit with because of that. We get uptake at the local level and then struggle at the national level. So similar to what Danielle was just saying, of how do you get the national government to understand that, because they have other priorities. So it, as I said, Uganda has now implemented a course. Tanzania are looking to incorporate it into their School of Public Service. So all of the countries we have been to, there is a very clear link between the national government and the local government. Unlike what we have in, say, Canada and the US, where you either got provincial governments and state governments, and those jurisdictions are quite different. We're federated countries, as opposed to that direct link from national to local level.
So Amelia, who was with the government accountability office, and said that it's great that you have so many countries, especially non-European, that are involved. You want to address your goals with the countries that you're reaching out to?
Well, the whole concept for the project was to go to least developed countries and target the subnational level. Now, obviously, you can't just go in and go to the subnational level without involving national governments. But it started out with a financial impetus. In some of the UN Capital Development Fund had been working with some countries in East and Southern Africa to develop municipal bonds, because these countries at the local level have a very difficult time raising funds. They don't have the same taxation system that we have, or the ability to pay taxes. So if they could raise money for infrastructure that will generate income, such as markets or a bus terminal, through a municipal bond, that would be great. But if you are going to invest in that municipal bond, you want some reassurance that you're going to get some form of return on your investment. And so that was sort of the genesis of this, in conjunction with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And it's actually been this realization that the Sustainable Development Goals can't be achieved without infrastructure that spurred the project along. But that initial genesis was that financial impact in how can you build that capacity at the subnational level for them to generate better means of financing infrastructure and raising money to, again, kind of increase the revenue.
Cecilia, you have a background in economic development. I bet you're chomping at the bit to comment on this one. You're on mute still.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying, and the thought came to me. I'm wondering, are you guys partnering with the MCC Millennium Challenge Corporation?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Because my thoughts are on that's a natural segue into countries that have compacts with the Millennium Challenge Corp for their development projects, which are normally infrastructure based. And that could be something where we could partner with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I'm the one who screams about the acronyms, by the way.
We all make the same mistake.
And we all do it. We all do it. It's terrible.
And that's something to something to put to Daniel next week, because
Yes,
I know that was the genesis of the project, but the funders and he's spent a lot of time trying to bring funders in through the UN system. So have a chat with him.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to need to have an actual meeting after these presentations, and Amelia keeps chiming in that the Millennium. Right. I don't know what it stands for.
Millennium Challenge Corporation.
Corporation is doing good.
From the US that helps fund development and international development. And Amelia is absolutely correct that this same issue is something that we have in all the cities across the US, and in the secondary and tertiary markets, the rural communities and the like. This is a tool that could be used and help economic developers very much.
But we're not putting that on the UN.
No.
UN has handled its mission. We're just setting the groundwork for us leveraging your excellent work around the whole world, because it's that good. People need it that simple. And I'm sure you don't mind us helping other people in the rest of the world. But I really like the idea of the reverse mentoring, where that happens here in the US.
Yes, it's important because there's plenty to be learned. We often forget the basic common sense things because common sense is not common. And the basics, we move far away from those. And like you were saying earlier, people want the big whistles and golden nuggets that they can put out there and say, oh, we put in a new system and it's wonderful. But they haven't done the work of really understanding what are the true processes, who are the people that are involved, who is touching this asset. And I like that you are making them start that diagnostic tool of assessing where are you now, where do you want to go, and then moving forward.
But I have to I sort of have to throw this funny little story in that when I was doing my when I did my master's and wrote a journal paper at the end of it, right? So that your professor can get credit for publication, you can too. And the comment that came back from it was very interesting research. It's simple but relevant. And I just love those words. It's been my mantra my entire career since then. In fact, it was even a quote, when you put your little quote in your PhD thesis, I think I had some quote about knowledge is knowledge is a process of piling up facts. Wisdom lies in their simplification.
Yep.
And I have no idea who said it. I've never been able to find the author. If somebody knows, great, please send it to me. But
could you repeat that again? Knowledge is
a process of piling up facts. Wisdom lies in their simplification.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I came across that quote, and I just thought it was so appropriate for my PhD thesis when I had got this comment back from a reviewer of this journal paper from my master's, that simple but relevant. I thought, well, I'd rather be simple and relevant than convoluted.
High praise. That's high praise as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
That really is, because it's important to be simple, because then it's accessible to everybody. And maybe people will actually do it. When it's complex, you might understand it, and great minds like yours may understand it, but people are generally lazy or occupied by many things and thoughts.
Yeah, we're living our lives here.
Exactly. So the simpler you can make it, and we all know we're turning into 30-second soundbite culture. So the simpler you can make it, the more relevant it will become to them. And if you can tie it to a story that helps them, that's the best. What stories have you used as you've done this process? That's a good question that I would love to.
Let me think. Well, I've used that one. Let me have a think while you ask another question.
Okay, so Obaid was talking about sustainable development goals being very important. And I was just reflecting what you were saying at the time. I think, Cecilia, Amelia's question is to you.
Yes, and I'm not quite sure what is she asking. What have we already done? Or
We just,
oh, no, that's what she's saying. She's saying,
yes,
where have you been? What are you wanting to do? And what have you already done? Absolutely, Amelia. And I don't know that I said, where have you been before? I said, where are you now? It's much more important to also know where you've been before and understand what you've already done, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but you don't want to forget a very perfectly good wheel that has been parked as a spare tire in the garage that could be used to propel you forward. So
I thought of a couple.
good.
So
Gave you
one most people here would be aware of, and these were kind of things that have informed me as I go along. But early on, one of the last projects I worked on when I was in the military was the replacement of the dew line up across Canada's Arctic and the northern US. It was a joint project between Canada and the US. It was a NORAD project, North American Air Defense. And so it was a modernization project.
the dew line being what?
Distant early warning line.
The early warning.
The dew line was originally put in place in the late 1950s, early 1960s, during the sort of the height of the Cold War, to detect Soviet bombers coming over the horizon.
Oh.
And there were various tiers to it. There was the dew line, there was the Mid-Canada line, and there was another line of these radar sites. And so I was on this project in the late 80s, early 90s, where we were replacing the dew line. But what came after that is that these dew line sites then had to be cleaned up. Now, when they were built in the 1950s and 1960s, nobody cared about the environment. In fact, there were a series of sites called repeater sites that were between the main sites that were built, because the signal at the time wasn't strong enough. The radar signal wasn't strong enough to get to the main sites. By the time they finished building the dew line, these repeater sites were redundant. So they were abandoned and they just left them. Just dropped the towers, dropped everything. So I use this analogy when I talk about planning up front, why you have to plan for disposal, because the cleanup costs for that project were probably in the vicinity of 50 to 100 times greater than what it costs to build that.
Oh.
So
And
that's that is one that, and so when you explain it to, you talk to people and you say, this is why you have to think. We don't think about disposal, but it's so important to think about all phases in that planning phase. So that's an example I use for that one. The another one is a funny one I love to joke about is when I was a very young officer, and people love to hoard stuff, right? If you have infrastructure, you don't want to let it go. I'm not going to sell that vehicle off, even though it needs to be disposed. It isn't working. I just might need it. I can salvage it. I can cannibal it and use the parts.
Guilty.
So,
Yes, okay.
Yeah. So we were in the middle of, in the mid 1980s, Canada was in the middle of this basis of replacing some of the old World War II infrastructure, the 1950s infrastructure. This brand new building had been built on the base, and it was supposed to consolidate all these other units. And there was this one building, an H hut, because it was the shape of an H. It was built in World War II. And we can't get rid of that when we need it. And so I had to take the base commander around to explain, because he was the final person. Everybody was pleading with him to be allowed to keep this infrastructure. And I knew that it was a bad building because I was a Girl Guide leader at the time. And there were certain parts of the floor we couldn't let the guides go on because they'd fall through it. So I took the base commander along and made sure that I got to one of these spots, and I asked him to just stomp his foot down on the floor. And he did, and his foot went through the floor. And that was it. The building was gone. So just sometimes so that is sometimes you have to be a little conniving in getting what you want, and managing. If you're trying to get rid of something or you want to get something repaired, then you've got to put somebody in a situation that they have no choice but to realize that you're right.
Human
And make
behavior factors into all decision making.
Yeah.
And if those of us who are trying to influence decision making don't realize that that's the basis, then we're not going to achieve our mission.
Yeah.
And associating with the UN helps us all get to a higher plane from the moment we start talking. So it's a real privilege to have you as a guest. We can keep going if people have questions or anything, but I wanted to say that. And then I also wanted to comment on your paper, your thesis paper, your master's was a perfect precedent for your work here.
Isn't that interesting?
You taught yourself well.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I'm so glad that you raised the issue of the different phases of whatever strategy you're doing. When Amelia says, what have you already done? The other question is, what do you already have? Because if we're talking about an asset, we're looking at all of the assets that are tangential to that and having a strategy that is holistic and complete. And if you don't figure out what to do with those towers that are not going to be utilized anymore, 10 years from now, you have issues and problems, as you said, unintended consequences that cost more than the solution and create risk and problems for you because somebody still has to be managing that process, or somebody is still responsible. You are still responsible and liable for anything that happens with those properties. So it's a thing that you have to make people think very holistically as they're going through creating that strategy, not just the new whistles and bells that they're going to get, but what are they going to do with the old ones? What's your excess property management going to be? Your excess asset management going to be? So this is great. How much time do we have, Miguel?
As much time as we need.
Yeah. Did you have?
We are over. This was supposed to be a 30-minute discussion. We're
so.
over. Yeah, but I wasn't stopping this, and the audience is still there. But Linda, I think if you want to have some closing comments, that would be appropriate.
Oh gosh, I know this is this has been great. To get, as I was saying to Mike at the start, to get this kind of feedback, to know that what started out as just trying to make something accessible has such so much applicability is exciting, and we've learned on the project as we've gone along, and so that the comments that will come forward from networks like this are great for us as well, because we've modified the assessment, we've modified the AMAT, we've modified how we do the presentations. I mean, we have a simplified AMAT process that came out of discussions with people in Nepal and Bangladesh. So it's not cast in stone. Daniel will talk next week about hopefully at the next iteration of the handbook. And it's by having these types of discussions that we advance it and we make it accessible and we sort of demystify it. that when people hear the words asset management, they don't get scared and, you know, and think that it's just not possible. It's just too big an exercise and we can never do it.
Yeah.
Well, Linda, I basically just launched an ALN UN assistance team or program or something. We're going to keep working together to figure out how to help you achieve your goals. They're totally aligned with what we're doing. Jack Kelly is an ALN board member and an ALN senior fellow, and he was with the Office of Management and Budget for 36 years. And he's been talking on the nationwide level for a long time, and I'll try to get him involved. And like I've invited Amelia, and Cecilia's doing some work already. We just love meeting you, and we look forward to the next time that we can have you as a guest and engage you in a panel and share your knowledge with us.
No, happy to. My pleasure, and thank you so much for bringing us into the ALN fold.
That's right. Well, it's wonderful because what we're talking about is something that is a global issue. And what better partner to work with than the United Nations? Maybe we can all become much more united in our approaches to doing things.
So we just want to say thank you one more time, Linda, and let everyone know that Daniel's going to be here next week, and thank Onuma Inc. and Definitive Logic, CGI, ABS Quality Evaluations, and Jacobs, and all of our organizational members, including Cecilia's Strategies Insight. Thank you for that. And next week, we'll be talking at the United Nations global level again. And then the following week on the 14th, we're going down to the level of a single town. Our guest was the mayor of a 5,000 person town, Golden, in British Columbia. And that will be on the 14th. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Happy Labor Day.
Yes, bye-bye.
End of summer day. No.
On my way to Italy on Monday for 2 weeks.
Have a great vacation.
Have a great vacation.
Thanks.